Aire Dlí, and my question is very specific, Minister. The status of the independent review of Part 4 of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 2017, which was due for completion. The latest answer was the end of last year, but really it was due for completion in 2020, 3 years after the law became operational. There was a 3-month period. We're over 3 years later. There isn't a sign of it. Where is the report? Do you have it? When will it be published? And if you could explain the delay.
Thank you, Deputy. I know this is something the Deputy has been interested in for some time, and I know I've responded to you on this previously. Obviously, Section 27 of the Act provides for the review to which the Deputy's question refers. We commissioned an independent consultant to undertake this statutory review, but there have been a number of reasons, more particularly her work to complete the familicide study, which meant it wasn't possible to complete this in the time frame. So the particular individual was commissioned to focus on this piece of work. We had a very unfortunate situation where a person commissioned to do the familicide study passed away. We then, on engaging with this individual for this particular study, asked them to take it on, and that piece of work took much longer. So I was reluctant to take her off the particular work she was doing, or to take away this particular review, because I suppose we anticipated that the familicide work would be done much quicker. Where we are now, essentially, following discussions with this individual, we've mutually agreed that it's not possible for her to complete this particular study. She has been very helpful, however, in making available to my department the documentation and the research work which has been done, so it's not to say there is absolutely nothing done at this stage. My department is going to advertise shortly to commission a new person to complete the review. The reason that that's only happening now is because it's only in the last few weeks that we've received the body of work that has been done to date, and so without setting out the terms of reference, we wanted to know whether it was a commission for a piece of work that would include research, interviews, the background work, or just the writing up of a report. It is just the writing up of a report. The huge body of work has been done, so that will be advertised shortly, and I can absolutely assure the Deputy that once the review is completed, the report is received, any recommendations will be brought to this House. So it really was a case that we had an unfortunate situation where somebody passed away. The person who was supposed to conduct this particular review took on the familicide report. That took much longer than intended. I didn't want to take her off this particular commissioned report, but unfortunately the delay has resulted in obviously us going way beyond what had been committed to in the legislation, but it is an absolute priority to get this up and running as soon as possible. But I think what is positive is the bones of the research work has been done. It's now a matter of just writing up the report.
Thank you, Minister. It's good and bad news, at least there's some clarity. However, it's 6 years later since the legislation became operational. It's 3 years since you were legally obliged to carry out a review, 3 years and 3 months. And I really don't know what happened. I understand that the person died and there was difficulties. I understand all of that. But what I don't understand is the person that we're talking about was confirmed as the study lead for the familicide and domestic homicide review in June 20, after the woman died, the very respected woman. I don't even want to mention names here. However, then you appointed the same person to review the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act after that. It just doesn't make sense to me. And then, well, that's I might be wrong, but that's the way I'm reading it. And like I took a lot of time in relation to that piece of legislation. I actually voted against it with just 2 other colleagues here in the door after looking at it and considering it, because I felt it was endangering women. So the review is extremely important in looking at convictions and prosecutions. We need that to see if the legislation is effective.
Thank you. And I agree the review is extremely important. The person in question was commissioned to do this review first. Subsequently, the other person in question passed away, and this person was asked to complete that. It took much, much longer than anybody thought. And sorry, without saying names or getting into details, it took much, much longer to do the familicide. And I think anybody who's looked at the report will see the magnitude of work that was involved in that. So yes, a decision could have been taken to make that change, but it was my understanding at multiple points that we would actually be finished the familicide review much earlier on. What is positive is that a huge body of work has been done. It is a matter now for a new person to put together the report. There's a lot of work has happened, and I myself even have engaged with members of An Garda Síochána who are solely working in this area, how the law is currently working, so there is some understanding where it's working, where it's not. And obviously the review itself will look at whether further changes need to be made. I know the issue of brothel keeping is one that comes up. What it shows internationally is where you legalise things, it doesn't necessarily result in protecting those who are most vulnerable. And that is the sole objective of this legislation, as you will agree. It's to protect the women who are at the heart of this, who are extremely vulnerable people, and in most instances are there against their will or trafficked and don't have a say in what is happening to them.
Minister, I could be wrong, but my notes tell me, and my own research and my office's research tell me, that the independent reviewer was appointed in July 2020. That was after she'd been appointed the month previous in relation to the homicide review, the domestic homicide review. So she was given both. One month in between them, and this one came after the other one. Now, be that as it may, but I really would like clarification on that. Be that as it may, this legislation was brought in to criminalise the purchase of sex, to increase the penalties and so on, and with the sole purpose of protecting women. And we have absolutely no data from the government now whether that has actually happened. But we do have very important research from Queen's University Belfast, from Amnesty International, from Limerick, all telling us that women are in worse danger. Amnesty International 2022, we live within a violent system, shows that the 2017 legislation has placed sex workers at a higher risk of abuse, and it goes on. I won't go over time. That's what's available to me, but I have nothing from the government.
Thank you. This legislation, as you've said, it's made significant changes. It is brought and has been brought in to provide additional protection for people involved in prostitution. What we have seen in other jurisdictions, particularly in certain areas, as I said, when we're talking about brothel keeping, which is an issue that I know you, Deputy, and others have raised, is that by decriminalising brothel keeping, it actually creates a greater loophole which allows the likes of those criminal gangs and others to profit, but also to continue in the abuse that is happening, in particular to women. So it is, I fully agree with you, it is absolutely vital that this report is finished as quickly as possible, that we get all of the information. As I said, there's been a huge amount of engagement with the Gardaí and those who are responsible for implementing the law as it stands. And I know myself there are already a number of ways in which we can improve and provide changes perhaps to the law to allow them to do their job better and to make sure that the work that we're trying to do, and that is to prosecute those who actually procure women for sex, that they are the ones that are prosecuted here, but also the ones that are responsible for actually setting up these brothels, many of them who are working on an international basis as well, not just at a local level.
If I may take a few seconds for my 30 seconds on the next question. Both are on the same team, violence against women. But I don't accept what you're saying. They're your opinion and they're held bona fides. But what I've asked for is a report. We need a report outlining the convictions and so on. In relation to this question, it's a specific update on the establishment of a statutory domestic, sexual and gender-based violence agency. Where is it at? The figures are horrific in relation to gender-based violence and sexual violence. 22 was the worst year on record. Sorry, I've got confused with the clock. Yeah, I'll leave it. I'll come back. Yeah, it's all right. It's gone all over the place. Yeah.
I have longer than 30 seconds, don't I?
No, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah. Deputy, as you'll be aware, tackling domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is an absolute priority for me and indeed this government. One of the key and central elements of the new zero tolerance strategy is the establishment of the agency. I'd given a commitment that this agency would be up and running in January of 2024, and we are on track for that to happen. On the 28th of February, the government approved the drafting of the bill to provide for the establishment of the agency. The general scheme of the bill was published on the 6th of March. The Oireachtas Joint Committee on Justice conducted its pre-legislative scrutiny hearing on the 18th of April with engagement from a number of sectoral organisations and civil society groups. The report was published on the 11th of May. Its recommendations are now under consideration. What my department is doing is taking those considerations, working intensively with the Office of Parliamentary Counsel on the bill, and I do hope to be in a position to publish, if not in the coming weeks, then it will be in early September, to ensure that we have it ready for the next session and that we will have it enacted by the end of the year, so the new agency will be up and running in January of next year. We have secured approval for certain posts as well through the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. So there is work happening separate to the legislation to make sure the positions can be put in place. The strategy states that in the detailed design phase of the agency, a key principle is to work with specialist community-based organisations, and that has been a theme throughout the entirety of the zero tolerance plan, that we're working with the NGOs, the people who are at the front face of this all the time. An initial high-level meeting was held with a number of national NGOs last December to progress the co-design of the functional model, and my department then hosted facilitated workshops in February and in March, and I'm pleased to inform the Deputy that the independent facilitators report of the issues that were raised in these various different workshops was recently circulated to all participants and been published, and it is absolutely the case that once this agency is established, that we will continue in this vein of co-design, of cooperation, of collaboration, of making sure that those who know and have been working at the coalface, as I said, for many, many years, that they are at the heart of this new agency and making sure that it works and it functions in the way that we want it to. Thank you.
I welcome that it's on target, and I welcome that positive development. Forgive my cynicism, but it's born of burnt experience in relation to this matter. Back in 95 or 96 was the task force, and then we've had 3 strategies, and we've had any amount of debates on it. In the meantime, we've had 12 people dead in 5 alone this year. We've had 12 in 2000 last year, the worst in over a decade, and so on. I could quote those figures. It's upsetting. And so we need action in relation to this. We have a 3rd strategy now. We have the promise of an agency. You tell us it's on time. I hear that. The general scheme, the report you have referred to, has 21 recommendations. The National Women's Council criticised the general scheme for its failure to include survivors or civil society groups, and also the lack of power invested in the agency to oblige government departments to act. And remember the audit that was done that talked about the fragmentation of services. That was one of 3 reports done. So that's where I'm coming from in holding you to account.
I suppose nobody is more devastated to see the numbers than I am, given, I suppose, my commitment in trying to address this issue. But what we need to make sure is that we're not just responding, that we're putting in place longer-term structures to deal with this in a long-term way, and that is where the agency will be absolutely vital. We are going to replicate structures that currently exist, working with the agency, where we have a committee that is chaired by the Taoiseach, where I, as Minister, working with all of my colleagues across the different departments, will respond to and feed into. This is coming directly then from the agency, who will be monitoring the work that is done. So there is a direct link from the agency, the work of implementing the zero tolerance strategy, which has an initial lifespan of 5 years, but obviously we'll build on it as we have with the other strategies, and that feeds directly into government and is overseen by the Department of Taoiseach. So there is a huge amount of oversight here. It's important, as I've said, that the work that's been done, be it in engaging with the NGOs or the Justice Committee and the pre-leg scrutiny, that all of that information is taken into account, and that's what's happening now at the moment in the development of the legislation. So it's absolutely a priority for me that this will be established in early next year, but obviously that we have the support and work very closely with all of the organisations, as you've mentioned.
Thank you, Minister. Just the audit of structures around domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. The report said a lack of effective oversight of the implementation of the previous national strategy, a fragmented approach and lack of interest and attendance by some government departments, lack of effective costed implementation plans for the 2 national strategies. I'm not making this up. According to Safe Ireland, the national strategy, the 3rd one, is more ambitious than its predecessors, but the measures barely scratch the surface of what is a wide-scale social problem. Sinead Givney, Chief Commissioner of the Irish Human Rights and Equality, that violence against women has reached levels in Ireland, crisis levels in Ireland. And in relation to the actual CSO survey, 21 years it took to do the CSO survey after Savvy. According to Professor Hannah McGee, lead author of Savvy, in relation to the CSO, not much of anything has changed for the better in 21 years. Sexual violence is an iceberg, huge and hidden, and we need a serious national dialogue to figure out how to change it. That's the background I'm coming from in relation to this.